Welcome. Today, we're diving into the mind of Abdel Wahed El-Wakil, an architect with a really radical idea that our buildings aren't just concrete and steel, they're actually reflections of our soul. And fair warning, he has some pretty stark things to say about what our modern world is really telling us about ourselves.
Okay, so he kicks things off with this bombshell. Think about that for a second. He's saying the social decay we see all around us, crime, violence, you name it, isn't just a failure of policy, it's a failure of architecture. How on earth can a building be responsible for violence? Well, let's get into it.
So, here's our roadmap. We'll start with his take on the crisis of modern buildings. Then, we'll get into some of his surprising solutions, like why copying is actually a good thing. From there, we'll talk about what it really means to be original, where true knowledge comes from, and finally, we'll land on his big idea, the soul of architecture.
First up, the crisis of modernity. El-Wakil's core argument is that we are building places that are, fundamentally hostile to us. How did our own buildings turn into our enemies? He points to these huge, sometimes even award-winning housing projects. You've seen them. They're so massive and confusing, they become impossible to govern. You've got these endless identical hallways, streets built for cars, not for people, and just no connection to nature. And what happens? They become hotspots for crime and social decay. So bad that many of them just have to be torn down. And here's the real kicker. For El-Wakil, this isn't just about bad planning or ugly buildings. The real problem, the deep-down issue, is that our architecture has lost any connection to the sacred, to our spiritual lives. And when our buildings don't feed our souls, the world they create just becomes chaotic. So, how do we possibly fix this mess? Well, El-Wakil's solution starts with a word that, let's be honest, every art school teaches you to hate: copying. He says our obsession with being original all the time is actually holding us back. You gotta hear this story he tells. Early in his career, he designed a house, and people kept saying, "Oh, this is beautiful. It must be the work of your teacher, Hassan Fathy." Now, his client was furious, right? But El-Wakil, he was absolutely delighted. Why? Because for him, the whole point of a masterpiece is that it perfectly captures the lessons of the master. It's proof you've actually learned something. But, and this is super important, he's not talking about pastiche, that kind of lazy cut-and-paste job where you just slap a bunch of historical styles together. No, he's talking about imitation as a deep, respectful way of learning. It's how a kid learns to talk, right? By imitating their parents. It's how you eventually earn the freedom to create something truly your own. And that leads us to another word he thinks we've totally messed up: original. When we hear that word, we think new, different, never been done before. But for El-Wakil, it means something way, way deeper. This here just lays it out perfectly. Being truly original means going back to the origin, the source, the tradition. It's about having deep roots. What we call creative today, he says that's often just about ego, about twisting and distorting forms just to be different. It doesn't have any roots at all. It's not original, it's just a distortion. And yeah, he puts the blame squarely on modern education. He says universities basically teach what he calls the three prongs of the devil: ignorance of your craft, greed for money, and an ego that just wants to stand out no matter what. I mean, wow, he does not hold back. Okay, so if the universities are failing, where does true knowledge actually live? For El-Wakil, it's not in a lecture hall or on a computer screen. It's in the hands of the people who actually build things. He says the biggest mistake we ever made was creating this huge divide between the white-collar architects sitting behind a desk and the blue-collar craftsmen out on the site. Back in the day, they were the same person. By separating them, we basically disconnected the brain from the hands, and we lost a ton of essential knowledge along the way. This story he tells just nails the point. He asked a master mason to teach him how to build a dome, and the mason says, "Sure, on one condition: you take off your architect's hat." What does that mean? The mason explained. When you make a mistake as an architect, you have an eraser. Here, if we make a mistake, you and me are dead under the dome. Talk about real consequences. That's the weight of knowledge you hold in your hands. And that lesson, that real work involves real risk, it brings us to his final, most profound point about the soul of architecture. For him, creating something great isn't about what you get. It's about what you're willing to give up. It's about sacrifice.
He says that the measure of love for your family, your art, your work, anything, is how much you're willing to sacrifice for it. To create something that has real value, you have to be willing to sacrifice your time, your comfort, and especially your ego. It's about devotion to the craft itself.
And this is his final, pretty sharp critique of our modern world. He sees a generation that wants the easy way, the escalator to the top. But he argues there are no shortcuts to real knowledge. True mastery only comes from taking the hard road, the one that requires a struggle. You just can't download wisdom. So we end up with this incredibly powerful question. If our buildings are a reflection of what we value, of what we're truly willing to sacrifice for, then what do our glass boxes and our sprawling suburbs and our attention-seeking skyscrapers actually say about us? What do they reveal about what we really, truly love?